In a small coastal town where the sea wind often carried the smell of salt and rain, there lived a woman named Elena Ruiz. Her house stood at the end of a narrow lane, painted in faded blue with little flower pots lined up on the windowsill. From outside, it looked ordinary, like any other old house in the neighborhood. But inside, the walls were filled with the sound of piano notes, soft, warm, and full of life. Elena wasn't a rich woman. She didn't own a car or fancy clothes. Her shoes were always a little worn, and her hands, though graceful, showed the marks of years of playing. Yet when she touched the piano keys, everything around her seemed to pause. It was as if her small living room transformed into another world, a world made of melody and emotion. Most people in town knew her as a quiet woman who gave piano lessons to children. But few knew her story, the one she kept hidden deep inside. Years ago, Elena had been one of the most talented pianists in a prestigious conservatory. Her future was bright. She was supposed to travel, perform, and make a name for herself. But fate had other plans. One rainy night after a concert rehearsal, her car met with an accident. She survived, but her right hand was badly injured. For months, she couldn't even move her fingers. Doctors told her she might never play again the way she used to. That night changed everything. The dream she had worked for all her life shattered in a single moment. For a long time, she avoided the piano. She couldn't bear to look at it without feeling pain. But as years passed, she realized that music was not something she could run away from. It wasn't just her talent, it was her soul. So she started again, slowly, quietly, and with a different purpose. She began to teach. At first, she didn't advertise. She simply placed a small handwritten note on the community board near the market. It said, "Piano lessons for children, affordable and friendly." The word affordable was important to her. She knew many families couldn't pay high fees. To some children, she even taught for free, saying it was a little favor. But deep down, she did it because she saw herself in those kids. The same spark, the same innocent love for music. Every afternoon, her little home would fill with laughter, chatter, and the sound of small hands trying to find the right notes. Some of the children came barefoot from nearby houses. Others brought their mother's old notebooks to take down lessons. Elena never complained. She treated every student with the same warmth, whether they paid or not. Her neighbors often wondered why she still lived so simply when she had so much talent. A few said she could have gone to the city, made money, become famous. But Elena didn't care about fame anymore. What she cared about was the light she saw in her students' eyes when they played something beautiful for the first time. One day, while she was watering her small garden, a car stopped in front of her house. It wasn't just any car. It was a black luxury car shining even under the dusty afternoon sun. A tall man in a gray suit stepped out, followed by a small boy who clung to his father's hand. The man introduced himself politely. "Good afternoon. I'm Richard Hanley, and this is my son, Liam. We heard you give piano lessons." Elena nodded and smiled kindly. "Yes, I do." "Would you like to join?" The man explained that his son had stopped speaking much after his mother's death a year ago. He wanted to help him open up, and someone had told him that music could help. Elena looked at the boy's shy face. His eyes were full of sadness but also curiosity. She agreed to take him as a student. From the first day, Elena noticed that Liam was different from the other children. He didn't talk, didn't laugh, and hardly made eye contact. But he listened carefully, and when his small fingers touched the piano, something quiet but powerful came out. It was as if he was speaking through the keys. The first few weeks were hard. Sometimes he would freeze halfway through a song, his hands trembling. Sometimes tears would roll down his cheeks without any sound. Elena never asked him to explain. She simply waited, letting silence fill the room until he was ready to play again. Slowly, the piano became his voice. Elena often stayed after class, sitting by the window while Liam practiced. She would hum softly, guiding him through the melodies. There was something healing in those moments. The boy finding his voice and the teacher rediscovering hers. Outside, life in the small town went on as usual. Fishermen returned at dusk. Children played on the streets, and people greeted each other at the market. But inside that little blue house, something quiet and magical was happening. A teacher and a child were bringing broken music back to life. Elena's lessons were never just about notes and rhythm. She often told her students, "Music is not about playing fast or loud. It's about feeling." Every note you play must come from the heart. Her words stayed with them, especially Liam. One evening, when most students had left, Liam stayed behind. He hesitated, then softly asked, "Miss Elena, do you ever feel sad when you play?" She smiled gently.
"Yes, I do."
But sadness is part of music too. Sometimes it's the most honest sound we can make. That was the first time Liam had spoken more than a few words. His voice was small but clear. That night, Elena sat by her old piano long after he left, thinking about how pain could become beauty when shared through music. Days turned into weeks, and Liam's playing improved. He began to smile more, even laugh a little when he missed a note. For the first time, his father, Richard, noticed a change. He couldn't understand how a simple woman in a small house had reached his son in a way doctors and counselors couldn't. One afternoon, Richard came early to pick Liam up. He stood outside quietly, listening through the half-open window. Inside, he saw his son playing a tune he had never heard before, soft, emotional, almost haunting. And beside him, Elena sat, eyes closed, humming gently to guide him. Something about that moment touched him deeply. For the first time, he realized that healing didn't always come from money or luxury. It came from human connection, from people like Elena who gave without expecting anything in return. But Elena didn't know that her simple kindness, her quiet lessons would soon touch more hearts than she could ever imagine. She was just happy to see her students grow. She never knew that the little boy she taught in secret would one day play a song that would make a millionaire cry. For now, her days remained the same. She woke early, prepared tea, and opened her windows to let the morning breeze fill her small home. She would dust the piano keys gently as if greeting an old friend. Then one by one her students would arrive, bringing laughter, mistakes, and music into her world. And every night after everyone had gone, she would sit at the piano alone. Her fingers would move slowly, carefully over the keys. The melody that came out was one she never shared with anyone, a tune born from her pain and hope. It was a secret song, one she played only for herself, not knowing that one day it would change everything. Elena had noticed that Liam was slowly opening up. The boy who once sat quietly in the corner, barely making a sound, was beginning to explore the piano with curiosity. Every day he came to her little living room, carrying a small notebook in which he scribbled tiny notes about the songs he practiced. His fingers, once stiff and hesitant, were now moving more confidently across the keys. Yet there was still a fragility in his playing, a hesitancy that showed he was guarding something deep inside. Elena understood that the music was not just a lesson for Liam, it was a lifeline. She remembered her own years of struggle, the nights when she played alone to comfort herself, the tears that fell silently onto the piano bench. Now she could see that same quiet struggle reflected in Liam's eyes. She never forced him to speak. She knew that sometimes silence itself held more meaning than words. One afternoon, she decided to try something different. Instead of giving him a sheet of music to follow, she asked him to close his eyes and imagine a place that made him happy. "It could be anywhere," she said softly. "A garden, a beach, even your bedroom. Just imagine it and play what you feel." Liam hesitated. His small fingers hovered over the keys. But then, almost imperceptibly, he began to play. The notes were uneven at first, shaky like someone testing the water, but as he continued, the melody grew smoother. It was a song full of longing and hope, something tender and raw that Elena had never heard before. She listened quietly, not wanting to interrupt the boy as he found his voice. When he finished, he opened his eyes and looked at her nervously. "Did I do it right?" he whispered. Elena shook her head gently, smiling. "There is no right or wrong here. What you just played, that was beautiful. That was you." Liam smiled faintly, and for the first time she saw a glimmer of pride in his eyes. That small moment was a breakthrough. Music was no longer just notes on a page. It had become his way of expressing feelings he couldn't say out loud. Over the next few weeks, Elena encouraged Liam to compose more songs this way. Sometimes she would hum a gentle tune, and he would try to follow her rhythm. Other times she would leave the room and let him play freely, watching silently from the doorway as he experimented with the piano. Every time she marveled at how the boy's confidence grew, not in grand leaps but in small, quiet steps. Elena also noticed a change in his personality outside of music. Liam, who had once avoided eye contact and spoken only when necessary, began to smile more. He would sometimes hum softly while arranging his music sheets, or even ask her small questions about the songs they played. Why does this note sound sad? Or can I try this faster? These simple questions filled Elena with warmth. They showed that the boy was starting to trust her, to feel safe enough to explore and make mistakes. Richard, his father, began to notice the change too. One afternoon he arrived early to watch Liam practice. At first he stood silently near the doorway, not wanting to disturb them. But as the boy's fingers danced over the keys, Richard felt something stir inside him. The music wasn't just skillful, it was emotional, full of feeling and story. He saw his son laughing softly at a wrong note, then correcting it with determination. And for the first time in months, he saw Liam truly happy. After the lesson, Richard spoke to Elena quietly. I don't know what you're doing, but it's working. He's different. I haven't seen him smile like this in a long time. Elena smiled, but shook her head. It's not me. It's the music. And it's him. He's learning to speak with it. Richard nodded thoughtfully. I didn't know it could make such a difference. The bond between Elena and Liam grew stronger. On rainy afternoons, when the wind howled outside and the streets were empty, the two of them would sit by the piano for hours. Elena would sometimes play softly, letting Liam mimic her movements. Other times she would let him play whatever came to his mind, never judging, never criticizing. Every session was a lesson not just in music, but in patience, trust, and resilience. Elena also began noticing the subtle ways in which Liam communicated through music. A slow, gentle melody meant he was thoughtful or worried. A quick staccato rhythm meant excitement or frustration. Sometimes he would play softly and pause repeatedly, as if unsure of how to continue. Elena learned to read these cues and would gently encourage him, saying things like, "Take your time," or "It's okay to make mistakes." One day she suggested a small challenge. "Let's create a song together," she said. "I'll play a line and you add your notes after. Let's see what story we can tell." Liam's eyes widened, but he nodded eagerly. Elena started with a soft, slow melody, delicate like falling rain. Liam hesitated, then added his own notes, cautious at first, then more confidently. Together they built a melody that ebbed and flowed, rising in moments of joy and dipping in moments of quiet sadness. It was imperfect, full of pauses and stumbles, but it was alive. When they finished, Liam looked at Elena, a small smile on his lips. "It's ours," he said softly. Elena felt a lump in her throat. "Yes," she whispered. "It's ours." These moments were precious, small victories that no one else saw. But they mattered deeply. Elena had spent years teaching children in quiet rooms, never seeking recognition. Yet with Liam, she felt something different, a deep connection, almost like family. She knew that this bond, formed through music and understanding, would last far beyond the piano lessons. As the days passed, Elena noticed that Liam began experimenting on his own. He would stay after lessons, quietly playing pieces he had learned or new melodies he had imagined. Sometimes he would write little sketches in his notebook, drawing shapes that represented the music he felt. Elena encouraged this creativity, telling him that music could be anything he wanted it to be, not just what was written on the page. Richard noticed these changes too. One evening he asked Liam how he felt about the lessons. The boy paused, then said, "I like playing. I like being here." That simple statement carried more meaning than any words could express. Richard realized that Elena had given his son a safe space to heal, a place where emotions could be expressed without fear or judgment. Elena never sought praise. She didn't tell anyone about the progress Liam was making. But in the quiet moments, when the boy's laughter echoed through her small home, she felt a profound sense of purpose. Teaching in secret, she had discovered that her music could touch hearts in ways she had never imagined. One rainy afternoon, as the wind rattled the windows and the sea roared in the distance, Elena sat at the piano with Liam. He played a new melody, one he had composed himself. It was hesitant at first, filled with pauses and questions, but gradually it grew bolder. The song had a quiet strength, a story of someone finding courage after fear. Elena listened closely, tears welling in her eyes. She didn't say anything, not wanting to interrupt the boy's flow. When he finally finished, he looked up at her, unsure. "It's okay?" he asked. Elena smiled, her voice gentle but full of warmth. "It's more than okay. It's beautiful. You made it with your heart." That day, something shifted. Liam no longer needed words to express himself as much. His music carried his emotions, his thoughts, and his growing confidence. Elena realized that the secret she had kept for so long, the melody she had composed in quiet, lonely nights, could now live through her students, giving them a voice and a sense of strength. Even Richard noticed the change. He watched his son from the doorway, marveling at how Elena had transformed him. He didn't fully understand it, but he knew it was real. Music had broken through the wall of sadness that had trapped Liam, and Elena had been the guide. By now, the quiet lessons in her small blue house had become a rhythm of life. Every day brought progress, every note a small victory, every smile a reward. And though Elena had never planned to become a hero or a savior, she realized that the simple act of teaching in secret could change lives in ways she had never imagined. The little boy who had barely spoken a year ago was now finding his voice through music. And Elena, who had once thought her dreams were over, had discovered a new purpose, one that was quietly, beautifully, and deeply human, unseen by the world. In that small house with faded blue paint and flower pots on the windowsill, something extraordinary was happening. A teacher and a student were finding healing, courage, and hope through the language of music, preparing for a moment that neither of them yet knew would change everything forever. Elena had been quietly observing her students for months, guiding them through the small victories and occasional frustrations of learning music. Liam had grown more confident with each passing day, and the little house with faded blue paint now echoed with laughter and music that felt alive. But she wanted them to experience something bigger, a moment where their hard work could be shared, where the music they loved could touch others outside the walls of her home. She decided, quietly and without announcement, to organize a small recital. It wasn't going to be fancy. She didn't have money for a big hall or expensive decorations. Instead, she chose the old community center down the street. The place was simple: worn wooden chairs, a stage that had seen better days, and a few flickering lights. But for Elena, it was perfect. Music didn't need luxury. It needed a heart to listen. Elena spoke to her students in her gentle, encouraging way. "We are going to have a recital," she said. "It will be small, just for our families and friends. But I want you to play with all your hearts. This is your chance to share what you've learned." Some of the younger children looked nervous. One little girl clutched her teddy bear tightly, her eyes wide with worry. Liam, however, looked calm, almost contemplative. He had been practicing in secret at home, experimenting with melodies that spoke of things he couldn't say in words. He wasn't thinking about performing for others. He was thinking about sharing what was inside him. On the day of the recital, Elena arrived early, carrying her sheet music and her small notebook filled with the secret songs she had composed over the years. She arranged the chairs, tested the piano, and made sure everything was ready. Slowly, families began to arrive, bringing children and curiosity with them. The room was small, but it had a warmth that no fancy hall could match. The audience whispered quietly, settling into their seats as the children took their places. Elena guided them gently, reminding them to breathe, to focus, and to trust their own music. One by one, the students performed. The younger children stumbled a little, some missing notes, others playing too fast or too slow. Elena smiled softly at each one, applauding quietly and nodding encouragingly. She knew that this recital wasn't about perfection. It was about courage, growth, and the joy of expressing oneself through music. Finally, it was Liam's turn. Elena had saved him for last, knowing that the recital would reach its emotional peak with him. He walked to the piano slowly, his small hands brushing the keys as if greeting an old friend. For a moment he froze, looking out at the audience. His father was there, sitting quietly, his usually stern face softened with anticipation. Elena leaned over and whispered, "Remember, it's your music. Play what you feel." Liam nodded slightly, closed his eyes, and began to play. The notes started softly, hesitant and delicate, as if testing the air. But as he continued, something extraordinary happened. The music transformed. It was no longer just a song, it was a story. Every note carried emotion, a quiet depth that seemed to fill the room. The audience was silent, captivated by the sound. Elena watched from the side, tears welling in her eyes. She recognized the melody. It was one of the secret songs she had written long ago, the song she had never shared with anyone. Somehow, in his own way, Liam had discovered it, or perhaps she had guided him to it without realizing. The tune spoke of sadness, of hope, of quiet strength. emotions she had carried alone for years now coming alive through his hands. Richard sat frozen in his seat, unable to look away. The music touched something deep within him, something he hadn't felt in years. Memories of his own childhood, of lost moments, of regrets he had buried under work and wealth, surfaced with each note. His eyes filled with tears and he turned quickly, trying to hide them from the audience. Liam's playing grew more confident. The melody rose and fell, tender and powerful at the same time. Elena could see the boy pouring his heart into each note, speaking in a language that words could never capture. It was as if the music was healing not only him but everyone listening. When the last note lingered in the air and slowly faded, there was a moment of silence. The room seemed to hold its breath, caught in the aftermath of what had just been shared. Then one by one the audience began to clap softly, quietly at first, then more loudly. But Richard remained seated, still overwhelmed by the flood of emotion. He could feel the weight of the years and the distance he had kept from his son melting away with the music. Elena walked quietly to Liam, kneeling beside him. "You played beautifully," she whispered. "I'm proud of you." Liam looked at her, a small smile tugging at his lips. Did he like it?" he asked softly, glancing toward his father. Elena nodded gently. "I think he felt it in a way that words can't reach." Richard finally stood, his hands shaking slightly. He approached Elena after the recital, his face still glistening with tears. "I don't know how to thank you," he said quietly. "I've never felt anything like that. And my son, he's changed. You gave him something no one else could." Elena shook her head, smiling softly. "I didn't do it alone. He played that music with his heart. I just helped him find it." That night, after everyone had left, Elena sat at the piano alone. She traced her fingers over the keys, thinking about what had happened. The secret song she had composed years ago, the one she had never shared, had finally found a voice. And it wasn't just hers anymore. It belonged to Liam now, to the boy who had learned to express himself through the language of music. She realized that this was what teaching had always been about. Not fame, not recognition, not applause, but connection, healing, giving someone the courage to speak when words failed. In the quiet of her little house, surrounded by the echoes of a song that had touched hearts, Elena felt something she hadn't felt in a long time, a deep sense of fulfillment. Over the following days, the town began to talk quietly about the recital. People spoke of the young boy who had played a melody so moving that even grown men had cried. But Elena didn't seek attention. She continued her lessons as usual, welcoming children with warmth, patience, and encouragement. For her, the real reward wasn't the applause, it was the knowledge that music could touch lives, that it could heal, and that it could give someone a voice when silence seemed permanent. Liam, too, had changed. He practiced more eagerly, often staying after lessons to try new melodies. He no longer shied away from mistakes, understanding that each note, even when imperfect, had meaning. His bond with Elena grew stronger every day, built on trust, patience, and the shared language of music. And Richard, the usually distant father, began to notice something important. He spent more time with his son, listening to the music, asking questions, and quietly learning how to connect in ways that words alone could never achieve. The recital had opened a door, and he was stepping through it slowly, carefully, and with emotion he hadn't allowed himself to feel in years. Elena never imagined that a small recital in a tiny community center could have such an impact. Yet in that moment she realized that music, when shared from the heart, could create ripples far beyond what anyone could see. The boy who once barely spoke had found his voice, and in doing so, he had reminded everyone around him of the power of courage, trust, and human connection. As she closed the piano lid that evening, Elena felt a quiet satisfaction. She knew that the journey was far from over. There were still melodies to teach, hearts to reach, and children to guide. But for now, she allowed herself to sit in the memory of that recital, of the music that had filled the room, and of the silent tears that had flowed because someone had finally dared to play from the heart. In that small house with its faded blue walls and flower pots on the windowsill, the story of healing, hope, and courage continued. Music had become more than notes and rhythm. It had become a bridge between souls. And Elena, who had taught in secret for so long, understood that the most powerful moments often happened quietly, away from the eyes of the world, in rooms filled with trust, patience, and love. After the recital, the quiet of Elena's little house felt different. The laughter and music of the children still echoed in her mind, but now there was a new energy, a feeling of possibility, almost like the house itself had come alive. Liam had returned home buzzing with excitement, replaying every moment of the performance in his mind, recounting to his father how he had felt each note. Richard had never expected to feel so affected by something as simple as a child's music. He had thought that success, wealth, and control could shape his world, but that evening had taught him otherwise. Watching his son pour his heart into the piano, seeing the fragile courage behind every note, had opened a door in him that he hadn't known existed. It was strange and uncomfortable, yet profoundly moving. The next morning, Richard came to Elena's house unannounced. The door creaked as he stepped inside, holding a small envelope. Elena looked up from her piano, startled but welcoming. "Good morning," she said softly. "Good morning," he replied, his voice quieter than usual. There was a hesitation, a weight in his shoulders that made her realize he was struggling with something inside. He handed her the envelope. I thought you might like this," he said. Elena took it carefully, opening it to find a note and a check. Elena frowned gently. "You don't have to pay me. You know that." Richard shook his head, a small smile tugging at his lips, though his eyes were still glistening with emotion. "It's not about payment. It's a thank you. You've done something I never thought anyone could. You've changed my son and maybe even me." Elena felt a lump in her throat but kept her voice calm. "I didn't change him. He did that himself. I just helped him find the courage inside." Richard nodded, still unsure of how to express what he felt. "I've been so focused on everything else," he admitted, his voice low. "Work, money, expectations. I didn't realize how much I was missing. He's growing up and I wasn't even seeing him. But you helped him speak, helped me see him. I don't know how to thank you enough." Elena smiled gently. "Just keep listening to him. That's all I ask." Richard left with a quiet nod, but Elena knew that his life had already begun to shift. She could feel it in the air. The tension that had once surrounded him was softening. Music had unlocked something deep inside him, something that had been dormant under years of routine and responsibility. Meanwhile, Liam's life began to change in subtle but powerful ways. At home, he played more freely, no longer worrying about mistakes. Richard began asking questions about the melodies, learning to recognize the feelings behind each note. Sometimes they would sit together in the evenings, Liam playing quietly while Richard listened and occasionally humming along. It was a small act, but it created a connection they had never shared before. Elena watched these changes with quiet satisfaction. She knew that the bond between father and son was fragile and new, and that it needed time and patience to grow. But she also recognized the importance of keeping the lessons gentle. Music, she knew, was a teacher of life, showing children and adults alike how to express what they could not say in words. One rainy afternoon, Elena invited Richard to stay for a lesson. At first, he was hesitant. He was a man used to control, used to giving orders, and the idea of sitting quietly and watching, learning from a child, felt foreign. But as he sat on the edge of the piano bench, he found himself drawn into the process. Liam played a simple melody, soft and tentative, and Richard listened. Slowly, almost unconsciously, he began to follow the rhythm, tapping along with his fingers. Elena watched carefully, her heart swelling with quiet pride. This was the moment she had hoped for. Not just the child learning, but the adult learning alongside him, rediscovering the joy of simplicity, of patience, of being present. "See?" she said softly. "It's not about being perfect. It's about feeling the music." Richard nodded, a small smile breaking through. I think I understand," and he did. Over the next weeks, he started making small gestures, sitting down with Liam to play, asking questions about the music, even showing interest in the songs Liam had written himself. Liam, who had once been cautious around his father, now found himself sharing melodies and secrets without hesitation. But it wasn't all easy. There were moments when Richard's old habits surfaced, times when he would forget to listen, when he would get frustrated at work and carry it home. In those moments, Elena reminded herself that transformation wasn't instant. She encouraged Liam to continue expressing himself through music, reassuring him that his father was learning too in his own way and time. One evening, After a particularly challenging week, Richard arrived home looking weary. He had spent the day in meetings, making decisions, handling crises, and yet he found himself drawn to the piano. He watched Liam practicing a melody he had composed that week, and something inside him shifted. He realized how rare these moments were, how precious it was to witness his son growing into himself. Without thinking, he sat down next to Liam and quietly pressed a few keys. At first he fumbled, hitting wrong notes and hesitating, but Liam, smiling gently, continued his melody, adjusting naturally to his father's mistakes. And for the first time in years, Richard felt something simple yet profound: joy without expectation, connection without words, pride without control. Elena, who had been quietly observing from the doorway, felt tears prick her eyes. She realized that her quiet teaching, her secret lessons, were no longer confined to her little house. They had begun to ripple outward, changing lives in ways she had never imagined. The next week, Elena introduced a new concept to her students: collaborative composition. Instead of playing alone, she encouraged them to create music together, listening to each other, adapting, and building something as a team. Liam was naturally enthusiastic, and even Richard participated, hesitant at first, but gradually becoming more confident. The experience taught them all the importance of patience, empathy, and cooperation, lessons that went far beyond the piano. As the weeks passed, the transformation in Richard became more apparent. He began attending more lessons, sometimes just to watch, sometimes to play alongside his son. He asked thoughtful questions, learned to celebrate small victories, and even started to express emotions he had long kept buried. He realized that money and status could never replace connection, and that the lessons Elena was teaching were far more valuable than anything he had pursued in his adult life. Elena, however, remained humble. She never sought recognition, never asked for thanks, and never let her pride overshadow the work. She continued to teach quietly, patiently guiding each child according to their needs, understanding that the true measure of success was not applause or accolades, but the hearts she could touch and the courage she could nurture. One evening, Richard stayed late, long after the other students had left. He watched Liam play a melody he had been struggling with all week. Elena noticed his quiet presence but said nothing, allowing him to observe. When Liam finished, Richard stood, walked to the piano, and quietly played alongside him. Their music intertwined, imperfect but heartfelt, creating something new and meaningful. Elena finally spoke softly. This is what it's about. Sharing, growing, feeling together." Richard nodded, his voice thick with emotion. "I never imagined that music could do this. It's like it's speaking for us when we can't." Liam looked between them, eyes wide, realizing that this was something extraordinary. For the first time, he saw not only his own growth but the transformation of his father, and the silent guidance of Elena that had made it all possible. That night, as Elena closed the piano lid and looked out at the quiet street, she reflected on how far they had all come. Music had bridged gaps that words could never reach. It had healed wounds, opened hearts, and created bonds that would last far beyond the little house with faded blue walls. She knew there was still work to be done. There would be challenges, moments of doubt, and days when progress seemed impossible. But she also knew that the foundation was strong, built on trust, patience, and the unspoken language of music. In the soft glow of the evening, Elena realized something profound. Teaching in secret wasn't just about imparting skill. It was about giving someone a voice, nurturing courage, and helping people see the beauty of their own hearts. And as she listened to the quiet echo of Liam's melodies, intertwined now with his father's tentative notes, she knew that her journey, and theirs, was far from over. But it was already extraordinary. Time seemed to move differently after the recital. The quiet house with its faded blue walls was no longer just a place for lessons. It had become a sanctuary of growth, courage, and connection. Elena continued teaching, patient and gentle as always, but now the lessons carried a deeper significance. Liam's confidence was soaring. Richard was learning to slow down and truly listen, and the impact of her secret teaching had begun to ripple far beyond what she could see. One bright morning, a letter arrived at Elena's doorstep. It was simple, with a clean envelope and elegant handwriting. Curious, she opened it and found an invitation. The community center where the recital had taken place was hosting a small event to celebrate local talent. Among the names listed was Liam's. The letter praised the children who had participated in the recital, acknowledging the courage, creativity, and heart they had shown. Elena felt a gentle pride stir within her. She knew this recognition was not the reason she had taught in secret, but it was a sign that the quiet work of patience and care was beginning to matter to others as well. She looked at Liam, who had been sitting nearby practicing another melody, and smiled. "You're invited," she said. "This is a chance to share your music with more people." Liam's eyes widened. "More people?" he asked softly. "Yes," Elena replied. "But remember, it's not about applause. It's about expressing yourself." Richard overheard the conversation and stepped closer, his face a mixture of pride and hesitation. "I'll come too," he said. "I want to hear him play again, and I want to be there for him." The day of the event arrived. The community center was modest, but the room was filled with anticipation. Families, neighbors, and a few local dignitaries had gathered. Liam took the stage, a mixture of nerves and excitement shining in his eyes. Elena whispered, "Play with your heart," and stepped back to watch. As Liam began, the notes floated across the room like soft sunlight through a window. Each chord, each delicate passage carried emotion and meaning. The audience was captivated. Some held their breath. Others whispered quietly to neighbors, and a few closed their eyes, letting the music wash over them. And then, at the back of the room, someone unexpected appeared. Richard. He had arrived early, standing quietly, his hands folded in front of him. The emotions he had tried to suppress surfaced once again as he listened to Liam play. This time, however, he felt something deeper. Not just awe, but gratitude, love, and a recognition of the miracle unfolding before him. As Liam's song reached its crescendo, the audience was completely silent, hanging on the final notes. When the last sound faded, there was a pause, a perfect, quiet pause that seemed to honor the moment. Then applause erupted, gentle at first, then growing louder, heartfelt and sustained. Richard's hand shook as he clapped, tears welling in his eyes. He realized he had never felt so proud, never felt so connected to another human being, and never experienced the power of music in such a raw, transformative way. After the performance, the organizers approached Elena and Liam. They praised Liam for his talent, courage, and dedication. They asked Elena about her teaching methods, impressed by the child's confidence and the depth of emotion in his music. Elena, as always, remained humble. "He has the courage in him," she said softly. "I only helped him find it." Richard, watching from the side, felt a swell of emotion he could hardly put into words. The transformation he had witnessed in his son and within himself was profound. He realized that the wealth he had chased for years could never replace the joy of these moments, the shared music, the emotional connection, and the understanding that had blossomed quietly over time. That evening, after the event, the three of them returned to the house. Liam was tired but happy, humming a new melody he had created inspired by the day's experience. Richard sat quietly beside the piano, watching his son and reflecting on the journey they had been through. "You know," he said finally, his voice soft but steady, "I've never understood what it meant to really listen. Not just hear, but truly listen. But today, I think I do. I feel it. I feel him, and I feel what you've done for him." Elena looked at him, her gentle eyes meeting his. "You've done it too," she replied. "You've learned to listen, and that's what matters. Teaching isn't just about giving knowledge. It's about creating space for someone to grow, and you've done that for him in your own way." Richard nodded, absorbing her words. "I never thought I could learn something like this. I thought I was too old, too busy. But I see now that it's never too late to grow or to change or to be present. He's given me that chance." Liam looked up at them both, his small hands still resting on the piano keys. "I like making music with you," he said simply. Richard smiled, a mixture of pride and newfound tenderness in his expression. "I like it too," he said. Days turned into weeks, and the bond between father and son deepened. Richard continued to participate in the lessons in small ways, learning to appreciate the process rather than seeking results. He began sharing stories from his own childhood with Liam, teaching life lessons gently and listening more than he spoke. Liam, inspired by the new connection with his father, experimented with more complex melodies, blending his emotions with what he had learned from Elena. Elena, meanwhile, continued her quiet work. She began composing new melodies for her students, ones that encouraged collaboration and expression. She encouraged the children to teach each other, to explore music as a language of connection. Slowly, the ripple of her secret teaching began to extend beyond her little house. Other families began to notice the difference in their children, the confidence, the patience, the courage to try new things without fear of failure. One afternoon, Richard visited Elena with an idea. "I want to do something for you," he said, handing her a notebook. Inside were sketches, thoughts, and reflections he had written while observing Liam and the other students. "I want to document what you've done here, not for fame, but so others can see the power of this teaching. The world could use more of it." Elena's eyes filled with tears. She had never sought recognition or rewards. I don't know what to say," she whispered. Richard smiled gently. "Say yes," he said. "Say yes so your story can reach others. Your teaching, your patience, your heart, it deserves to be shared." Elena nodded slowly, feeling a mixture of humility and pride. For years she had taught in secret, quietly nurturing talent and courage without expecting anything in return. But now she realized that sharing her story could inspire others to do the same, to teach with patience, to guide with love, and to recognize the hidden potential in every child. Liam, overhearing the conversation, ran to the piano and began to play a new melody, bright and full of hope. It was a song he had created to express his gratitude, his love, and the joy he felt for the people who had shaped his journey. Richard listened, moved beyond words, and Elena felt her heart swell with quiet satisfaction. In that moment, she understood the true power of music and teaching. It could change lives, heal hearts, and create bonds that would last far beyond a single lesson, recital, or performance. It wasn't about fame or recognition. It was about courage, connection, and the small, consistent acts of care that shaped lives in ways that were invisible but profound. Months later, the quiet work in Elena's home continued. New students arrived, curious and eager, unaware of the extraordinary transformations that had occurred quietly within those walls. Elena welcomed them all, patient and gentle, guiding each child with love and understanding. Liam continued to grow as a musician and as a young person, carrying the lessons of courage, patience, and expression into every part of his life. Richard remained engaged, learning to listen, to share, and to connect in ways he had never imagined. And in the midst of it all, Elena reflected on the journey. She had taught in secret, she had nurtured courage, and she had witnessed the extraordinary power of music to heal and transform. One small recital, one song played with a pure heart, had changed lives, quietly, beautifully, irreversibly. She realized that this was the true reward of her work. Not applause, not money, not recognition, but the knowledge that she had helped someone find their voice, had opened hearts, and had reminded people of the simple but profound power of connection. As the sun set, casting warm light through the windows of the little house, Elena sat at the piano once more. She played softly, listening to the echoes of the songs that had carried courage, hope, and love through her home. And she smiled, knowing that the music would continue to flow, touching lives in ways she could never fully see, but which would always matter. In that quiet, unassuming place, teaching in secret had become something extraordinary. And for Elena, for Liam, and for Richard, the journey had only just begun, with music leading the way.